Welcome to this webinar, Tips for Online Learning. My name is Bethany Ulman, and I am one of the Ecampus Student Success Coaches. You'll see on the right, that is a picture of our whole team. So we are here to help support our online students the same way a lot of the offices on campus are designed to support on-campus students. In this presentation today, we're going to talk about a few things to try and help give you some tips and strategies for when you're taking both online and remote classes. We want to kind of break down the difference between remote and online learning. We want to talk about some of the myths that we hear pretty often from students about what online learning looks like. We'll talk about some of the strategies that we have to help keep you organized so that you can be successful in those online classes. We'll talk about the ways you should be communicating with your instructors, and then I'll give you a brief introduction to the overall eCampus Success team. Success coaching is a part of that team, and I'll kind of break down the differences in there. So remote versus online learning. One of the important distinctions when we're talking about remote versus online specifically is that remote learning is synchronous, meaning that there is typically a required day and time when you would have to be on Zoom. So when you go to register for classes, they will have a class day and time, meaning that you'd have to show up and be in that Zoom meeting at that point in time. The lecture then happens via Zoom, just like it would in a regular classroom, except you're sitting either at home or somewhere watching that lecture via your computer. And then the last part is that, those assignments and other kind of learning materials will be delivered on Canvas, but you have that component plus the required in-person Zoom meetings. When we talk about online learning, the main distinction, again, is that they're asynchronous. So there isn't any specific time that you would require to be online. There's no class schedule or meetings. The only exception to that would be if you decide that you want to meet with an instructor kind of one-on-one because you need help or you're reaching out to ask questions, something like that. But that would be scheduled between you and the instructor. When we think about online learning, the biggest difference is really that online learning is designed to be delivered online, funnily enough. And at eCampus, there's three ways that we do that. The first way is that we are figuring out how we engage students, with the content of the course. And so we are focused on active learning. So that can look a lot of different ways, from engaging with lectures, having videos or things that you watch. We often design multimedia to help solidify concepts for students. So we're taking that content, and instead of just trying to put a lecture online, we're really thinking about how you can engage with it on a deeper level. That second piece is how we're interacting, or how we're setting up the interaction between you and other students. One of the biggest things we hear, and we'll actually talk about later, is that learning online can be kind of isolating, and it means I don't get to meet my classmates. And we'll talk about how it can be a little more challenging, or it may look different, but in reality, you actually get to meet folks maybe to a deeper level than you would in an in-person class. And so we'll talk about how we can use discussion forums or peer reviews, group projects to build those relationships. And then that last piece is really how we're facilitating your engagement with the instructor. So the instructor is definitely there to help solidify the course content. They're going to be answering questions. They're going to be grading you and giving you feedback. But the way you do that, again, online, it might look a little bit different than it would in an in-person class. So we're going to talk about some of the top online learning myths that we often hear from students. The first one is that you have to teach yourself the material. And really that isn't true. Just because you're sitting at home or in front of a computer doesn't mean that your instructors aren't involved and that they haven't put a lot of thought and effort into what that online class will look like. In many cases, the instructors are spending more time with kind of the material and figuring out how to make it engaging in an online format. And even though many of our instructors actually do teach both online and in person, we are really cognizant in helping instructors think about how we take that material and put it online. And while it may seem like a deficit to not see your instructors and not connect with folks online, I would say it's not necessarily a deficit, it's just different. And so the way you go about building relationships, again, we'll talk about in a little bit, just looks a little bit different. And so one of the things we want to emphasize that, like any education that you're getting, it's really up to you to take responsibility. So if there are questions or if there's things you don't understand, you are highly encouraged to connect with your instructors and ask questions, because it is on you. Your instructor may or may not reach out to you if they see that you're falling behind. So be sure to speak up and advocate for yourself. The second myth that we often hear from folks is that they won't have interaction with their classmates. And again, it will look different, and it's not what people are sometimes used to, but it actually can sometimes be more beneficial. And so, you know, as a success coach, I work with students around the globe, and we meet with students either over the phone, via Zoom, or sometimes even just via chat. You know, we're connecting with folks and building that relationship, which again looks different, but is not hard to do when you've got those different tools. One of the biggest aspects of online courses is those discussion forums. And one of the things that's beneficial is that in many cases, your classes will have an introduction forum where you'll actually get to go in and learn about every single student in the class if you choose. But that gives you an opportunity to actually get to know pretty much everybody in your class on a deeper level than you probably would in a large lecture hall. Many of these have you engaging with students as well. So you do the introduction discussion, and then you're often posting and responding to a prompt that your instructor gives you week to week. But again, that gives you the opportunity to get to know the other students, get to know their beliefs, their opinions, and be able to engage in a conversation that does actually help you understand the material on a deeper level. It's also moderated, right? And so in a lot of cases, in a lecture hall where you maybe have a few students who feel comfortable speaking up, discussion boards actually allow every student to participate because voices aren't being drowned out by people who maybe are really excited or feel really comfortable sharing things in person. One of the things I hear a lot from our eCampus students is that these kind of discussion boards are really beneficial for them because it gives them time to think and reflect on what they want to say instead of having to come up with an answer on the spot, which can be kind of anxiety inducing for some folks. They also allow for people to kind of speak a little more freely. There's not the same kind of stigma that comes. And while we always encourage students to be very respectful and the discussions are moderated so that they don't get out of hand, you will kind of see a bigger, or I should say a wider depth of ideas than you may in an on-person lecture or an in-person lecture. The third myth that we talk about is that, you know, professors are faceless, so that in an online class, they've just set up the content and then they walk away and we don't see them again. You know, in fact, that isn't really necessarily the case. And in online learning, that again looks a little bit different because you can't show up to an office hour and sit in front of them in their office. You can't, you know, walk up to them after class. What you can do, however, is utilize a lot of those same resources. So many of our online instructors do actually hold virtual office hours, and I would say check your syllabus. Many of the instructors will post those open office hours times, or will say, email me to connect. So Zoom and phone calls are always options with our on-campus or with our eCampus instructors. So you would just reach out to them and set up that appointment so that you can connect kind of in a face-to-face manner to be able to ask questions and get answers in real time. One of the other things we really encourage students to do that instructors often include as well is a Q&A discussion board in every class. The likelihood that if you have a question around course content or a question about an assignment, it's rare that you're the only student that has that question. So being sure, or I should say be sure to post that question to that course Q&A so that the instructor can answer it and all students can benefit from that response. I know it can sometimes be challenging to be the person that speaks up and says, hey, I really don't know anything, or I'm really confused, but I can guarantee you many students will thank you for stepping up and doing that. So I encourage you to take that first step. The fourth myth is that we hear from a lot of students that it is, I'm alone, I'm online. How am I going to build a network for post-graduation? And in a lot of cases in college, getting to know different people, especially finding people in your major, people that are in your same courses, can be helpful when you go to graduate because it can help you build your network. But you'd be surprised how much like I said, because you can build kind of those relationships differently online via the discussion boards and connecting with students kind of in a different way, it actually gives you a wider network. One of the great things about eCampus students as well is that many of them are actually working in the field. So they're currently in a position that you might want to be in, and they're coming back to school to build that foundation and earn the degree. So even if you aren't a eCampus student, you're an on-campus student that's taking either eCampus classes or remote classes, the likelihood that you are in classes with a student who is probably in that field or is doing an internship gives you a lot of good information if you sit down and connect with that person to say, what's your experience like? How did you get into this field? You know, what kind of advice would you give to folks that are starting out? You're also, you know, in classes with the same faculty who are teaching on campus as well as online. And so those are folks that are doing research in the field, that are writing and publishing, that are very familiar with the types of jobs in that field. So connecting with them on a regular basis and reaching out and just sort of saying, hey, you know, I'm really interested in what you're doing. How do I get involved? Is also a really good first step. And then the last myth that we hear pretty often is that online courses are easier than on-campus courses. And I'm of the belief that, you know, classes are easy when there's something that you're excited about, you're engaged in, and that's really what makes them easy. For online classes, I should say, you know, this really isn't the case. Online courses have just as much content, they have just as many requirements, and in some cases can be more demanding just because of the time commitment that it takes. You know, instead of going to a class and listening to the lecture, you have to schedule in that time, which again, we'll talk about later. And instructors have the same expectations of you. Just because you are in an online class doesn't mean that they, you know, you can't show up and do the discussion boards, you can't submit assignments. They expect that same level of our online students. And because you don't have those kind of same in-class reminders, you're having to manage a lot of that on your own, which for some students works out really well, but for others can be kind of a challenge. And like I said, we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. So those are our kind of top 5 myths. And we talked a little bit about how those aren't true. And now we're going to talk about some of the strategies that will help you in those online classes. So our big thing is creating an action plan. Most of being successful in an online program has to do with, again, that motivation. What's driving you to pursue this degree? You know, what career are you looking to go into? Why are you doing what you're doing? The second piece is then being really organized. And so we highly recommend creating an action plan. And that's made up of 3 different questions that we encourage you to ask yourself. The first one is, where will you study? And we'll kind of break this down a little bit more, but it definitely matters. The second is, when will you study? Having a really good plan and organizational system will help a lot. And then the third piece is really just thinking about, what other commitments will you have outside of school? And this one is big, especially right now, as most folks are doing remote learning or have switched to online and are learning from home. And there's a lot of other people around that will look a little bit different. So jumping in, where will you study? We highly recommend that you create a study space. We really want you to think about what affects your ability to be successful. What can that environment look like for you in order to set yourself up for success? We have folks that are really into, when they're open, studying in coffee shops, having that ambient noise around them, being able to put on headphones, but having people and things helps to kind of keep part of their brain occupied. They feel like they can focus better. Other people, like myself, have to be kind of in an office that's quiet, that is pretty distraction-free. And when we think about distractions, there are usually a lot of them. So if you've got other tabs open on your computer, if you've got, I have my dog here, if you have your phone that's right here, you know, what is kind of in your environment that's going to distract you, and how can you help kind of eliminate some of those? And then, you know, one of the things, especially for me right now, and I imagine for students as well, whether you're learning online or doing remote, part of being successful, like we said, is having that space, but being able to sort of set boundaries around what you do in that space. This really helps when you come to say, okay, we'll get to setting a schedule, but if I have a schedule and I show up to this study space, all of the cues on your desk in the area indicate to you, this is time for me to study. And it helps kind of mentally prepare you to say, in this space, I only study. I don't watch TV, I don't lay on my bed, I don't nap. This is the place where I go to do school. And so having those boundaries can be really helpful, especially if you're also working potentially and are working from home as well. That can be a little challenging. So how are you kind of changing environments or changing what's on your desk as you move throughout the day to help signify when it's school time? And then thinking about, especially if you're someone who has kids or are going to be home with your parents, what does that look like and who's going to be using this space, and how do you, again, kind of set boundaries, or at least have stuff that you bring in to help kind of set up to signify it's a study space, or kind of set boundaries around who can use it. That's up to you. But having that really dedicated space that signals to you it's time to study with very few distractions will be really helpful. And all of that to say, working online can be hard because you are by yourself quite a bit. Even if you're in Zoom meetings, it can be distracting. So I definitely have sticky notes around my computer that just have either motivational sayings or things that encourage you, whether that's, you know, the degree you're working towards, the career you're working towards, or even something as simple as like, you've got this on a sticky note can be really helpful to kind of keep you going. The second space, or the second idea that's part of our kind of overall study plan. So when will you study? This is a big part of being successful. And so having a schedule that works for you is ideal. There's a lot of students that will put together a very pretty calendar, or they'll find someone else's calendar online, but that's not their life. And so we really encourage you to think about what works specifically for you. We do recommend spending 2 to 3 hours per credit. So if you're in a 4-credit class, which is pretty common, we recommend that you spend anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a week on that one class. Again, that seems high, but given the fact that you're not in class for maybe 4 to 6 hours a week, you have to make up that time somewhere else. Whiteboards are a really good idea if you can put them near your study space to, again, kind of help lay out what your daily or weekly schedule will look like. You know, and then you can erase it and start over, or monthly. That works well, as that too works. And then that last piece of this is really sort of thinking about what that time looks like, giving it your best shot, and then fine-tuning it as you go throughout the term. You know, it's going to be hard to get it right the first couple of weeks, and it's going to take some tweaking, just depending on how long the reading takes you, how long it takes you to do the discussion boards, and if there's a lot of lecture videos. But week by week, you should be able to refine that to the place where you get into a really good groove and you have a schedule that really works for you. And then we definitely encourage you to, as you can see here on the side of the screen, where we've got kind of a picture of the weekly calendar that you can get from the Academic Success Center's Learning Quarter, putting in time throughout the day for when you're going to do have breaks, things that kind of help break up the day. That can be eating lunch, breakfast, dinner. That can be if you do end up taking a nap, if you have a work schedule, but also setting aside intentional breaks for you to step away from school. And I definitely encourage students, there's a big difference between sitting and watching Netflix for 2 hours and doing something that really re-energizes you. And so I often encourage students to think about, while taking a break may look like checking your phone for messages or just kind of getting online and reviewing stuff, I really urge you to think about whether that's actually giving you a break and re-energizing you, or just giving you time away. Both are good, and I would recommend doing both, but also thinking about what gives you energy, especially if you're in the middle of a hard project or a big paper. Giving yourself time to kind of re-energize is going to be important. And then the last piece is the best laid plans are just that, they're plans, and often life will change. Maybe the internet goes down, or someone else needs the computer, or there are a lot of different scenarios that come up. So how are you building an extra kind of buffer time so that if those things do come up, you have a way to work around and can still finish your assignments on time without being overly stressed? And then that last part we think about, these are just some questions that we really consider you think about. In many cases, and especially this fall, folks are going to be learning from their home. And so If you are just starting out in college, you may be required to help out with your family. You may be required to get a part-time job that helps support your family. You may be responsible for taking care of younger siblings. And even though you are going to school, oftentimes the priorities will have to shift hour to hour, day to day. And so some of the things we have you think about are, what are the other commitments you have outside of school, and being really intentional around what are those commitments, how much time do they take, and how am I including them in that weekly calendar? The other piece of that is, how do you reprioritize commitments? And so we often talk to students about connecting with your support network, whether that's your family, your friends, whoever that will be, and helping sort of lay out, like, school is my priority and I can reprioritize as need be, but I need leeway and heads up time so that I can make adjustments to keep school as kind of my top priority. And sometimes school won't be your top priority, and that's okay. Family and other things often will come first, but being intentional about how you reprioritize will help alleviate some of that stress later on. One of the main resources that we recommend is the Academic Success Center's Learning Corner, and you'll be able to link it from this presentation. The slides will be available as well as this recording, so I would say take a look through the slides. There are links to all of these, so I do recommend reviewing these later on, because they do have a lot of great strategies. So the weekly calendar was pulled from the Manage and Make Time, along with other weekly task lists that they have, so I highly recommend checking that out. As an additional tip, even if you, I should say, are not an eCampus student, but are taking eCampus classes, there are a lot of additional resources that are available to you. So success coaching is one of them, and while we primarily work with eCampus students, we'll definitely work with students who reach out to us. But if you're taking an eCampus class, you'll always have access to online tutoring, and we can even talk about how you would conduct research from a distance and or connect with disability access services if that's something you need. So again, the slides will be available, the links are here, so be sure to check those out as well. The last big piece that we're going to talk about, which seems fairly straightforward and is something that most instructors will outline in their syllabus, is their communication policy. And so when we talk about course communication, first things first, don't be afraid to reach out, as we talked about earlier. Your education is your responsibility. So if there are things you don't understand, reach out to your instructors, reach out to other students to make sure you get your questions answered. Yes. Just because you are learning at a distance doesn't mean that you don't have access to your instructor or to the other students or someone who can answer questions. So we do face a lot of, or hear from a lot of students that, like, it's isolating and I don't know how to do this. You're always welcome to connect with us, and we can kind of help you navigate what that might look like to reach out. And again, we talked about those office hours are a good way to connect with faculty. Setting up an appointment or a Zoom meeting is also a good way, and then posting in that Q&A discussion board can be really helpful. The biggest piece in all of that is that early communication is key. So if you know things are coming up in the term, or if something is developing, a family member gets sick, and you think it might become a bigger thing, connecting with your instructor early on, just letting them know what's happening. And then that way, if you do need to kind of talk about or work out some arrangements later on, you've given them a heads up, and they're usually a little bit more likely to work with you. They'll help you move or figure out what those options are for moving forward. So this is kind of a good template. Again, you can access the anatomy of an email to your instructor from the Academic Success Center's Learning Corner website. But here's some of the key things that you should really keep in mind. You should always email instructors and really anyone that you're communicating with at the university from your university-owned email account through Gmail. This is how we help protect your privacy and make sure that what we're sending, whether that's course information or I'm thinking of academic advisors, if they're telling you kind of classes to take or helping you work on petitions, anything like that, we need to make sure that that information stays protected and that it goes to you. So your own email account is really the place that you should be emailing us and should be checking pretty frequently. You should also include your name and your student ID number, ideally in the subject line, so that the instructor knows who you are, and if you can, include the class that you're in and the section number. Be pretty brief in explaining why you're reaching out and what you're asking for. Reach out early, and most importantly, be polite. You know, instructors are busy just like you are, and they definitely do want to help you. but long drawn out emails can be tough. And also, if you just don't have a lot of information, that can be really frustrating for instructors. If they have to go back and forth with you multiple times to figure out what you need, it's going to be challenging for them. So I would definitely recommend reviewing the anatomy of an email a little bit more closely and making sure that you're following that template pretty closely. The other piece that, again, we talk to students quite a bit about is that, I don't get to know my instructors in the same way. And in some cases that is true. Like we talked about, you can't go up to them at the end of class and just kind of ask questions or pop in their office hours. But again, that doesn't mean you can't request a meeting with them and get to know them just in a different way. It typically takes a little bit more effort on your part, but it's worth doing. And so here are some of our tips for actually connecting with instructors. This is particularly important if you are thinking about potentially going to grad school and will need those letters of recommendation, especially from instructors and faculty members in your major. So the first one seems obvious, but engaging in the course and participating and maybe going above and beyond to respond to posts, that can be really helpful. You can also do some research on your instructor. So I have a photo here of the staff directory in the College of Public Health and Human Sciences. So get to know your instructor. Often they will post their research interests if they have papers. You can go in and review all of that information. And if there's someone that it's in an area, they teach in an area that you are interested in, setting up an appointment to talk about their research, how they got into that, what they would recommend if you wanted to get into that research can be really helpful. And then even if you're not taking a course with them, term to term, maintaining that contact and just kind of setting up appointments or checking in regularly to kind of help solidify them in your mind, again, because they're not going to see you in class, but how are you sort of showing up regularly in certain ways, whether that's email or setting up phone appointments so that they do get to know you on a better level. The last piece in all of this that I wanted to share was just some advice from eCampus students. So again, while many of you won't be eCampus students, you'll be taking online classes. The advice here is still really spot on and something I encourage you to review. We just talked about this, but again, be active in class discussions. You'd be surprised how far that goes in both connecting you with people, but also helping solidify the material and helping you think about different perspectives and different viewpoints that will really help you solidify the content. Similar to what we talked about earlier, creating a timeline and making sure that you're kind of laying out the tasks that you're doing each day and figuring out how long that will take you. Again, having that kind of timeline, having that schedule set will help you keep yourself on track, will help you honestly eliminate the amount of decisions you're making in a day and make sure that you're getting everything done on a timeline that isn't overly stressful. It is, while it can be, I should say, a little more challenging to connect with students in your program, it is easy to reach out and connect with them, especially since in many cases you will see those introduction discussion boards. So if there are things you have in common with other students or are in the same program or are seeing students regularly in the same classes, connect with them. Ask if they want to form study groups. You can use things like Google Chat, and there's all sorts of other tools out there that you can connect with folks virtually. If you're me, you're old school and you just go by phone. But to each their own. There are a lot of collaborative tools like Google Docs. And so if there's a group project or something that you're trying to keep on task, using something like that and having kind of a checklist to help with your group or just for you personally can be really helpful. So those are some of our tips from eCampus students. The last piece that I really want to talk about is Canvas support. And I'm going to move through this pretty quickly just because it's always going to be there. So Canvas has 3 different types of support, as you see here. The Canvas guides, which allow you to just kind of peruse questions, common FAQs that you might have. It's usually the best place to start. If you're like, I don't know how to do this thing, or if something's acting funky, that's a good place to start. There's also Canvas support where you can chat with someone, and then you can also call the Canvas support hotline. You'd access all of this from your Canvas page. So this is a close-in screenshot, but if you come over here on the left-hand side of Canvas, in every single Canvas course, or basically on your dashboard, you will see this help button with a little question mark. If you click on it, this side menu will pop out. You can find the Canvas guides here, again, that kind of FAQ, and then if you click each of these links, it will take you to either the chat where you can connect with Canvas or the support hotline. We do pay for 24/7 support, so inevitably, if you're submitting an assignment at 11:55 p.m. that's due in 4 minutes and something comes up, connecting with them and emailing your instructor are often the best route to go. So that covers most of our tips. The last piece I'm going to cover, again, pretty quickly, is just that eCampus is here for you. So I am a coach, and I will talk a little bit about coaching, but not much. So here's our eCampus Success team, and it's made up of kind of 3 different units. We have Ecampus Student Services, which you'll see is Jane Rogers, Joan Oakes, and Nicole Hernandez. They really handle a lot of the administrative stuff. We'll talk about that in a second. All of the success coaches, we're really here as a complement to the Academic Success Center that mainly serves online or on-campus students. We're here to serve those online students, so we help students navigate through navigating the university, kind of the challenges that come up there, but then we also work with students kind of on a one-on-one basis, helping to make sure that they have the support they need, whether that's accountability or just someone to help make sure if something big comes up that they're navigating that in an appropriate way. And then the last person, Tay McEdwards, is our proctoring manager. For many of our eCampus classes, we do have proctoring, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So eCampus Student Services. They assist pretty much any student that is in an eCampus class. And so if there are questions about tuition or the modules that are required, or if there's issues with content and the content or instructors, they're really the folks that you are going to reach out to. They also work on some of our administrative tasks, like I said. So if you end up needing an override to get into an eCampus course, they'll help facilitate that. If you decide you want to change your grading basis, which if you decide to do that, make sure you talk to your academic advisor. They'll help process those forms. And then if for whatever reason you ever need to do any type of petition through eCampus, they will help walk you through that process as well. When in doubt, connect with eCampus Student Services. Those folks are there to help, and they can help get you out to the right resource if they are not the people you need to connect with. And as I mentioned, many of our eCampus classes do have proctored exams. So for folks who don't know what proctoring is, it basically is our way to ensure the academic integrity of the class and the test. And so that means that you will connect with a proctor, which is essentially someone who will watch you take an exam to make sure that you aren't doing anything you're not supposed to. In some cases, this can be an online proctor. We use a company called ProctorU, and we are hopefully transitioning to a different proctoring company here in the near future. But basically someone will work with you to kind of make sure that when you're taking the test, you're only using approved materials, if any are allowed, and that, like I said, we're maintaining the academic integrity of the test and the class, because that's really where your reputation and the reputation of eCampus comes in, is that we are maintaining that students can't basically pay someone to come in and take their class. So trying to maintain that. Getting that set up early is really important. And so there's 2 things that we encourage you to look at when you're thinking about signing up for eCampus classes. Anytime you look at the eCampus schedule of classes, which will help outline the classes that eCampus offers, there's a section called Class Notes, and in there it will say requires proctored exams. Keep in mind, in some cases that comes with an additional fee, anywhere from $25 to up to $50 if you're scheduling the same day as an exam. So you should be able to know that before you even register for the class. And then the how-to guide that we have on our proctoring page will help outline how you actually go through the process of finding a proctor and setting it all up so that come test time, it should be a smooth, easy process. Quickly, this is what our proctoring page looks like. Like I said, over here on the left-hand side, when you go to that page, you'll see the how-to guide. We have some information on how you would find a proctor. If you live in Oregon, which quite a few of our students will, you can go to the Oregon testing centers. And then we sort of talk about like why academic integrity is important and some of our proctoring guidelines. So again, the slides will be available to you. Everything's linked, so you can check that page out as well. So we really ask you to think back, and because this isn't live, unfortunately, think back to if anything out of today's webinar was helpful for you, and think about a strategy just one that you might take and explore in the near future. We definitely want to see you be successful in our online classes, and a big part of that is you being proactive and setting yourself up for success. So this presentation should have helped give you some of those steps. Like I said, you're always welcome to reach out and connect with a coach if you feel like that would be helpful. Just know that we are here to answer questions and make sure that you have a smooth transition. So that's all for me. I hope you have enjoyed what we've shared today. Like I said, if you have questions, let us know. Oh, too far. This is our team. Here's all of our contact information. Again, these slides will be available to you. So if you have any questions, all of our information is here. Feel free to reach out. Otherwise, good luck and go Beavs.